Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RentPrep for Landlords podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the questions that you must ask a property manager before you hire them. So if you're a landlord and you've been thinking about maybe reaching out to a property manager to manage your rentals, these are the 10 questions you must ask.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the RentPrep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
This is episode 161, and we want to welcome Andrew Schultz into the office. He's actually local here in Buffalo, New York, works with Realty Edge. And Andrew, we just want to welcome you and thank you for being a guest on our podcast today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here today.
So Andrew, before we get into the questions, could you give us just a little bit of insight into your work and what you do? Specifically, I know I gave you an intro, but just kind of a little background information.
Sure. I'm the Director of Property Management over at Realty Edge, which is a local real estate brokerage located in Amherst, New York. We got a few offices now, but I work out of the Amherst office, and we manage about 100 doors across Buffalo and Western New York. Far north is Lockport, as far south is South Buffalo, mostly residential at this time. So we encounter a lot of anything you can think of. I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to residential management in the types of situations you find yourself in. Over the years, we've developed our property management business. Prior to being at Realty Edge, I was at another real estate firm, Prism Realty Group, took my book of business, moved over to Realty Edge. I've been there for about 4 years now, and it's been good. We've been growing pretty steadily, and we've got quite a nice little operation going.
Cool.
So what's really always fascinating for Eric and I having a property manager on the podcast is the exponential rate that you gain experience versus an individual landlord. So an individual landlord might go years between evictions or dealing with a situation or a circumstance, whereas you're dealing with this stuff pretty frequently just because of the amount of properties that you're managing. So picking your brain is really something that landlords got to pay attention to, because you're putting out years and years of experience on top of what they have because you've done everything as a multiplication factor.
Right, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So the 10 questions that you posted, I thought were great. We've ran through them, Eric and I, and we just wanted to pick your brain on these and kind of go through them and give you a chance to give an explanation on them. But this is really for, like Eric said, landlords that are interested in potentially hiring a property manager. And we talk to a lot of landlords that just dealt with a terrible situation maybe, and they're ready to call it quits. They're ready to give up. And like we were talking about before we went live here earlier, was that maybe that's not always the right thing. Maybe they can hire a property manager like yourself who can do this for them and add that new layer that this is no longer a huge stress in their life. And it may not be perfect for every landlord, but for some landlords, I know Eric and I have talked to enough that we almost say, like, you need a property manager. This is not something you should be doing. Managing people is not your strong suit.
Right.
And so sometimes having a professional property manager is key, but hiring the right one is probably more important than anything, right?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, the wrong property manager can literally cost you your entire business. Some people don't look at it as a business because they say, oh, I just have one rental property. No, it's a business at the end of the day. That's an asset that you own. Someone's renting it from you, and you need to be receiving an income from it. It's a business. It has all the different aspects that create a business. And a lot of people I've found will pick a property manager based off of a cost approach or off of, this guy answered the phone first and he sounded reputable. But they don't take the time to really interview property managers, multiple property managers on an in-depth basis. And it can really wind up costing them a lot of money in the long run, because a poorly managed asset is catastrophic to a property owner. And it doesn't matter if you have 1 unit or 100 units. One bad property can become a thorn in your side so quickly. So it's so important to have good property management, reliable property management in place.
So looking at the questions that we have here, and if anybody's interested in this document, we'll include it in the show notes. And it's also, if you join us at the RentPrep for Landlords Facebook group, you can find it in the files section, the questions here. The first question is, are you a licensed property manager? Do you have any certifications? Can you speak to those certifications and just give us a little bit of background information on that?
Sure. So for instance, we're obviously here in New York State. In the state of New York, you have to be a licensed real estate agent if you're managing property for another person and accepting a fee. The only exception to that rule is if you were directly employed by the property owner. So for instance, if you go to work for somebody and they have 200 units in a complex and they hire you to be the office manager, generally you don't need to be licensed for that because you're a direct employee of the property owner. If you have properties that someone's managing for you and you're just paying them on a 1099 basis, technically by New York state law, that person is supposed to be a licensed real estate broker or a licensed real estate agent working under a licensed real estate broker. They can't just work independently. That's critical. One of the things that does is creates what's called a fiduciary responsibility back to the client. It also gives you a point of recourse with the Department of State if this agent mishandles your asset or walks off with a pile of your money or something along those lines. You have a point of recourse. You can go to usually the local board of realtors if they're a licensed realtor. If they are a realtor. There's no such thing as a licensed realtor. If they're a licensed real estate agent, then you can go to the Department of State and try to get some satisfaction that way, whether it be a hearing, a license suspension, a fine, whatever it is. That's one of those things that's very critical. So the first thing is make sure you understand what the requirements are in your state, and then make sure you're following those requirements and whoever you hire to do your management is following those requirements. Past that, there's also going to be a ton of different certifications that you can get, whether it's, residential apartment manager, commercial building manager. There's all kinds of different certifications that you can pick up along the way. So, but the most critical part, I think, is that licensing, making sure that if they need to be licensed, that they are licensed, because that's one of your first layers of protection.
And that'll just kind of depend on your state, because I know some states you don't have to be licensed, but make sure you're looking into your state laws of what is required of a property manager.
So question number 2 for picking the right property manager, or the questions that you might ask a potential property manager that you're considering. How many properties are you currently managing, and what types of properties are they? Can you expand a little on that?
Sure. So you don't want to... Say you have a residential apartment complex of 25 units, which is pretty common size here in the Western New York region. The guy who's managing 1 or 2 single families, if you throw 25 additional units on top of him, he's not going to be able to handle that himself in most instances. So you want to make sure that you're putting the portfolio together with the right management team. You don't want the residential guy managing your commercial asset necessarily, unless they do both residential and commercial management, because they're very different, especially when you start talking about, common area maintenance, CAM charges, and things like that. The residential property manager may not know how any of that works. So it's important to make sure that you're choosing the right property manager based on where they're at in their business cycle and things like that.
Okay. That's really helpful. That's good to consider too. As far as question 3 that we have here, what is your fee structure? Can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
Property managers have varying fee structures, and there's no set standard. There really is not a set standard because everybody runs their business however they feel the need to. The typical structure that I see a lot of is a percentage of gross monthly rents, some portion of a month's rent when a new tenant is placed, and then maintenance usually gets marked up as well. Some property managers will take a maintenance charge for, say it's $100. We're going to go out and paint a wall. It's going to cost $100. Well, by the time the property manager gets that invoice and then turns around and marks it up, if they're doing what I call blind markup, where you don't actually see what the markup is, then you wind up with a $150 bill for a $100 job. The way that we do it over at Realty Edge is a little bit different scenario. We do open markups. So if a property owner is looking at a monthly statement, they'll see a line item for the maintenance job that was completed, right down to the point where it says this was the contractor, this is the work, this is the cost. The next line will be Realty Edge markup for that maintenance job. That's the amount you paid in markup. And the reason we do that is because it prevents the argument of, oh, I got price gouged by my property manager. Well, no, your manager wrote into your contract, wrote into your management contract, this is what the markup is going to be on every maintenance job. They performed the maintenance job. They marked it up by that percentage or dollar value or whatever. And that's what you paid, versus the property managers that will go and sell a $7,000 roof for $12,000 and just pocket the difference. So that's definitely something to be very, very cautious of. It's not the management fees that get you. It's really not. It's the maintenance that'll get you. So having somebody that's responding to maintenance and doing it in a proper fashion and not gouging you for the maintenance work that's done, that's critical to the success of your portfolio.
Yeah, I think you made that's huge, having that transparency, right? Of just knowing what it is, what's being charged. And some people might think, well, that's going to scare some people away that know that we're upcharging it. But from your perspective, maybe those aren't the people you want to work with anyway, but you're just being upfront about everything. And so there's not that argument later down the road.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and prior to doing my own property management, I worked for another property management firm, and they were blind markup type. And I could just see the things that were going on, and it made me kind of uncomfortable. So when I entered the business on my own, I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it the ethical way. I'm going to make sure people know what they're being charged for every step of the process.
So question number 4 that you should be asking of a potential property manager if you're looking to hire is, how do you send reports and can I see a sample? So expand on that a little bit for us.
Sure. So if your manager's not reporting to you on a monthly basis with a detailed financial account of what's happening inside your properties, that's a red flag immediately. Every single month our clients get, and it's actually pretty much the same day of the month every month with a little bit of a wiggle here or there, clients get a detailed report on a property by property basis, and it shows them all of the incomes and all of the expenses broken down on a line item by line item. We also include a report that shows this is your more generalized profit and loss statement for your entire portfolio. However they want it split out, we can usually accommodate. The people that call me and say, I haven't received a rent check or a proceeds check from my property manager in 8 months, and I haven't gotten any financial reporting in that entire time. Well, what are you doing? First of all, you should have changed property managers 7 months ago if you weren't getting the financial details that you need. You can't let somebody else run your asset but not tell you what's going on in it. You have to be receiving those detailed reports on a recurring basis, whether it be monthly or quarterly, however you set it up. We do all of our clients on a monthly basis, and it seems to go very, very well.
You emailing them or mailing them the reports?
We email them. Actually, our office is predominantly digital at this point. We do all of our reporting digitally. They get a PDF in their email every month on or around the 10th. That shows all of the income and all of the expenses broken down line item by line item, like I'd said. Then we also ACH their payments right into their bank account. So we don't even have to mail a check to property owners. I have property owners in France that have never seen the properties that they own. They just know that every month on the 10th, they get a wire deposit directly into their bank account, and that's enough for them. So it seems to work out pretty well.
Yeah, I really like that question just because it's so simple. If you're asking a potential property manager, how do you do your reporting? And they just kind of respond with like, you probably know right away, next property manager.
Exactly, yeah.
The next guy.
Mm-hmm.
So question 5 that we have here is, how are potential tenants screened?
And that's critical. I can't say enough as to how important it is to screen your tenants thoroughly before you place them, because a good tenant will stay for an extended period of time. They're going to be an asset to your asset, if you will. They're not going to be the tenant that's breaking windows and, putting up inflatable pools on your property and creating liabilities and things like that. The best offense is a good defense, I guess, in this instance.
Yeah.
Or maybe we flip it. I don't know. Screening, hardcore screening on the front end is what's going to save you from the eviction 6 months down the road. One of the things that I always tell my clients is, I would rather let your property sit vacant for an extra month than put a bad tenant in. And the reason for that is very simple. If I put a bad tenant in, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you lost rents. It's going to cost you damages. It's going to cost you attorneys and court and my time to file the eviction and everything else. And then I have to turn around and put a new tenant in after we fix everything. It's not worth it. I would rather let the place sit vacant for an extra month. Yeah, you might take a loss of a few $100s on that 1 month's rent, but the amount that you save by me not putting in the unqualified tenant that applied for the apartment is huge.
What a great takeaway. I mean, so many landlords I see panic, right? Mm-hmm. The vacancy is the worst thing for them because they're thinking in their mind, I got to pay this mortgage. This is, not going to work. We're not bringing any revenue on this. Mm-hmm. We tell that to landlords all the time.
Right.
Take the month of vacancy. Yeah. Find the right tenant.
Don't be in a rush to find the right tenant. That's critical. And there are so many landlords that don't understand it. They would rather I'll just get an extra security deposit. Yeah, but you can blow through an extra security deposit real quick when tenants start damaging things. So.
All right. So next question that you're asking the property manager is going to be, who handles the maintenance work? Why is that important to ask?
Some property managers have in-house maintenance crews, which tends to lead more to that blind markup kind of a situation because you don't really know at the end of the day what the expenses were. They're operating that business on top of their management business and things like. And I'm not discouraging that. There's a lot of guys that do have handymen on staff and it's very ethical and they do everything above board. But it's one thing that you have to be curious about. If they say, "Oh, we do everything in-house," well, how do I know that you're not, taking advantage of me on the maintenance because you're not making anything on the management. And by the way, I'm going to say this outright. We don't make any money on the property management. We make money on tenant placements and we make money on maintenance. I'm probably one of the few property managers that's willing to admit that fact. 10% of the gross monthly rents collected on a $650 rent is $65. That's not paying the bills at the end of the day. Where the property managers are making their money is on the maintenance and on lease placements and things like that, which is fine as long as they're doing it properly and doing it ethically and things like that. So that's pretty critical.
Before we get to the next question, and this is something that we had discussed earlier too, like what would you say to somebody who's like, all right, well, it looks like the incentive is for you guys to have a lot of turnover. I think you called it like these churn and burn kind of property
Churn and burn
managers.
property managers.
Yeah. Like what would you say to somebody that's like, well, how do I know you're not a churn and burn property manager who doesn't care if you're going to have to evict somebody, because then you're going to get that churn and you're going to get the money when that comes along with that?
Because I have good answers for all 10 of these questions. No, that's this. I wrote this guide. I've encountered a lot of different clients over the years. Some of them have signed on with us, some of them haven't. And the 10 questions guide is actually one of my critical pieces of marketing. This is a piece of paper that I send to everybody I talk to about property management. Because at the end of the day, I really don't care if they sign on with me. Sure, I want them to. That's my goal, is to grow my business. But if they're not going to sign on with me, I want them to make sure that they're making the right decision for their future. And that's a lot of property managers out here, especially in the Buffalo region, are what I call a churn and burn property manager. Well, they'll place a tenant, the tenant's not great, then they have to evict the tenant, then they have to renovate the place, then they have to fill the place back up, and they make money in every step of that process. I take it from a completely different perspective. If I do a tenant placement and they don't stay at least 2 years, I look at that as a failed tenant placement. And the reason for that is multiple points. Number one, it falls back on either customer service or maintenance. Number two, if I have to remove a tenant within the first 2 years, all those expenses are lost and the property owner is now losing money on that unit. But the third point there is these tenants that stay for a longer term are what help you build your basis for the future. If you're constantly turning these units over, you're losing money hand over fist. So our goal is when we place a tenant in a property, I want a tenant that's stable, that I think is going to stay for at least a 2-year period of time, even if I only put them on a 1-year lease initially. I want that tenant to be satisfied with not only us and our services, but the property and what the property offers, so that they want to stay for an extended period of time.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned that with your business model, it's where your clients, if their portfolio is growing, your portfolio is growing.
Exactly.
So you kind of always have that mindset. And if you can ask all of these 10 questions and get a good, idea of who it is you're dealing with, you want somebody who wants to grow with you. Moving into the next question, we're on question number 7 of your guide here. It says, how is rent collected? Can you expand on that?
Sure. There are so many ways to collect rents in this day and age. You can always go out and hand collect it, which I never recommend. I don't think we're collecting any rents by hand at this point. There's a variety of services. Our property management software, we're using AppFolio, but most property management softwares are integrated with some kind of an online payment platform for the tenants now. Online payments are huge. Over half of our tenants now are paying their rents online, which is great from an administrative standpoint. I don't have to touch a check. We don't have to run that check to the bank. We don't have to stand in line. We don't have to wait for the deposit. We don't have to wait for it to clear. It's in our account the next day and it's taken care of. We don't have to worry about it. But knowing how rents are collected, knowing how your tenants can, and obviously tenants can always mail us a check. I always forget about that one. Knowing how they're collecting your rents is important because it lets you know how up to date they keep their business.
All right, Andrew. So question number 8 is, can I see sample documents that you use? Why is that important to ask a potential property manager?
You should be able to see these people are going to be operating your business on your behalf. Knowing what their forms look like and making sure that you understand, especially their lease. If you're not providing them with your lease, your custom lease that you want them to use, if you're letting them use their generic lease, these guys could be going to Office Max and just buying a package of form leases off the shelf. You really have to know what the lease, especially as the lease, entails beginning to end. And you should be, anytime there's an update to that lease, if they change something, you should be maybe on a once-a-year basis reviewing all the documents with your manager to make sure that you guys are still on the same page and that your properties are being managed in the fashion that you want them managed in. The lease is probably the most important document, I would say, with regards to that. You're also going to want to look at their property management agreement. You're going to want to know, okay, this is the fee structure. I understand that. This is the term of the contract. But the one question that most people don't ask is, what are my outs? Like, how do I get out of this contract if it's not working? Am I locked in for the full year? Do I have to give you 30, 60, 90 days notice to terminate my contract? What are my options if I want to terminate this partnership? And that's what it is at the end of the day, is a partnership. And a lot of people don't see it that way, but they really should, because this person, again, is running your business on your behalf. So it's important to know every aspect of their business before you trust them with your business.
That's a great point too, because I don't think that's something that a lot of landlords consider. What's my exit strategy? What am I locking myself into?
Mm-hmm.
My son wanted to purchase an app the other day, and it was a monthly subscription. And I ran through with him and said, no. First, we need to figure out what the policy is. Could we use it for a month? It was like a fishing app. Could we use it for a month, and then when fishing season's over, we can cancel it? Or do we have to pay for the whole season where we're not fishing?
Is it okay if we go on a tangent here?
Yeah.
How do you pay a monthly for a fishing app? What is it doing for you?
I'll give a plug. It's called Fish Brain, and it's this app it's this app that tells you what fish were caught in what location, what bait they used.
Oh.
So it's actually really, really useful. It's
So is it like a crowdsourced Joe Fisherman caught a largemouth bass at this spot using a worm?
Yeah.
And
That's crazy.
My son tells me the other day, there were 41 bass caught at the small boat harbor. We should go there today. And this is the exact lure that they were using, or the different types. So, I mean, yeah, technology has really stepped into a new arena.
If they're smart, and this is just my IT brain working a little bit, if they're smart, this fisherman caught the largemouth bass using this lure. Here's a link to Bass Pro under our affiliate account.
Yeah, right. They don't do that, but they should.
They should.
You're absolutely right.
They should. I just made those guys $1 million.
Right.
I love the concept, but I will say probably your best fisherman is probably that 80-year-old guy who doesn't use the app.
Who doesn't use the app, yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, but you know what? He takes his grandson fishing, and his grandson logs it all. So we still find out his dirty little secret spots where all the best fishing is.
Right. He's the mole.
Right.
So we're not going to go into question 9, because I think we actually answered it pretty well, which is how long is the management agreement for? And you're just mentioning, just to kind of recap, that you want to make sure like what your outs are, how long is the actual agreement going to be for? Do you have anything else though that you would add to that?
Just be sure that you understand it completely. Have an attorney review it so that you understand, so that they understand what you're really getting yourself into, because it's a partnership agreement. It's not just a management agreement. It's a partnership agreement that you're signing with these people. It's important to protect your asset, and part of that is knowing what you're getting yourself into. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, is just make sure you understand what you're signing. I see it with tenants every single day of the week, where they'll come in and they'll want to do their lease signing, and they want to be in and out in 3 minutes. I have a 13-page lease. You're not getting out of here in 3 minutes. We're going to sit and read through this and discuss points, and you're going to make lots of initials. And it's almost as bad as signing for a mortgage, to be honest with you. But it's 13 pages because we have a lot of expectations of our tenants. We want them to be aware of it on the front end so that they don't get hammered on the back end. It's the same set of circumstances here. You want to know what to expect on the front end so you don't get hammered on the back end.
Totally makes sense. Now, 10th question is by and large my favorite one. And I know that people don't do this, and it drives me crazy. To be honest with you, Eric and I do this a lot. I should say Eric primarily. If we hire a new, let's say a developer or a designer,
right,
we've been able to weed out a lot of potential headaches or the wrong people just by calling references. And we've actually called references. I know a lot of people are thinking, well, of course, if somebody's listed as a reference, they're going to give a good reference.
Right.
Not so. Eric and I just ran into a situation where somebody saved us a potential headache on a developer and said, yeah, you know what? He was okay, but here's a list of some of the issues that we had, and made us think twice about it. So
Actually, that guy actually gave us a reference to somebody else, a competitor.
Somebody that worked out better.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I really believe this reference.
Right.
So as far as do you have references, can you expand upon that? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I would recommend, and actually I just kind of had a little bit of a brainstorm as I was sitting here. If somebody asks me for references, I always give them 3 references, 2 current clients and a past client. And I usually make sure that one of those clients had not necessarily a negative experience, but they had something that didn't go picture perfect, because I want them to understand this is the situation that occurred. This is how the property management company handled it. Because I think it's, everybody can say, oh yeah, they were a great property manager. But when you really dig down into the nitty gritty, you want to know how they handle the tough situations. And you only get that by asking a lot of questions of the references. The other thing that I think might be relevant, and I don't know if there's any property managers that would do this, but I think I probably would if somebody really asked, I would actually give a couple of tenant references as well. And I think that that's relevant because, again, these people are interacting with your tenants on a daily basis, whereas you no longer are. It's important for them to know that the tenants are being taken care of because the tenants are the profit center that make the whole thing go. So that's actually something I just literally thought of it as we're sitting here doing the podcast, but I can think of a couple of tenants that I might actually ask to be references for us for our property management clients because I'd like the clients to know that their tenants are being taken care of. So, I mean, that could even be something you ask property managers. Like I said, I don't know how many property managers would be willing to share a tenant reference. I don't think I have a problem with it. I mean, I don't have anything to hide.
Right.
So realistically, what you're trying to do is if there's skeletons in the closet, you want to find out about them beforehand. And I think that if you're asking a lot of questions, you're going to be able to weed out the bad property managers very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're going to prevail in that circumstance.
And I think as a landlord, hindsight is not something you have a luxury of when you're working on tight margins, when you're cash flowing barely enough to make it work. And maybe you're teetering on the edge of, do I just dump this property? What do I do? So again, I think, calling references is something that is so easy to ignore, not do, take the lazy way out, right? We see it with landlords who don't call previous landlords and current landlords.
Right.
It blows my mind. I don't understand why you wouldn't make that call.
I've been doing property management now for 9 years. I actually just renewed my real estate license and I saw it's been 9 years that I've been doing property management now. I bet you in the entire time that I've been doing property management, I can count the number of landlord references that we've done on 10 fingers.
Crazy to me. It's crazy.
And we screen.
That's 100 doors. That you have.
Well, right now we're at 100 doors. I bet you over the course of 9 years, we've probably done a couple thousand tenant placements over the course of the years, or, because it's just, and I bet you that if we've had more than, I'll say 15, if we've had more than 15 people call us for landlord references, I would say that's a lot. Nobody seems to call landlord references.
It's nuts. It really is. And a lot of misconceptions again around references, but I just gave you a great example where Eric and I called one, and the guy gave us the truth. So that's
right.
What you would expect. And let's be honest, nobody wants a bad client. Nobody wants a bad vendor. So this whole thing is a feeling out process, right? To make sure we work well together. You said something a little bit earlier on that I thought was really important, was that you said you may not close every client or everybody that grabs this handout, right? And that's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I think that's that's one of the really important features of a property manager. I would say that I want in a property manager is somebody that's not so desperate or hungry for my business that they're willing to
say and do anything.
Yeah, say and do anything. I want a property manager that says, you know what, maybe this isn't going to work.
Maybe this isn't the right fit.
Maybe you're looking for something that I can't do.
Sure.
And I would appreciate that more than having somebody that's willing to, lie, cheat, and steal just to land my business and then find out later he wasn't prepared for this. He didn't have the capability. So that's
and
huge.
it's property management's one of those things where if you just accept every ounce of business that comes through your doors, look, I could be 300, 400, 500 doors large right now without blinking an eye. But I've been very selective on the clients that I've accepted over the years. I go out and I drive every property before I accept a contract. I walk around the outsides. I look to see if there's obvious signs of neglect, either by the current owner or by their previous manager, because that's all stuff that helps me build a profile so I understand what this client's going to need going forward. There are properties that I've said, no, I don't want to manage this, either because I didn't feel comfortable with the client or the property, or because I think that it's going to be the wrong fit for our portfolio, something along those lines. I would rather say no to somebody and have them leave not happy, but not upset, rather than have them come back to me 6 months down the road angry because the situation's not working, because the management situation's not right. So it's important to, just like you're screening the manager should be screening you so that everybody's on the same page.
It's awesome. And we could pick your brain all day. I'm sure we'll have you back in because there's a lot of stuff that even as we're going through this, I'm thinking, I want to ask him about that. So we're definitely going to bring you back in. Such a wealth of knowledge. Again, landlords, whether you're thinking about bringing on a new property manager or just looking to manage properties yourself better, there's no one that's usually better to listen to than an experienced property manager because of that multiplication factor. It's huge.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to connect with Andrew, we can put whatever information you want to give us. We'll put it in the show notes for episode 161. You can just go on our website, rentprep.com, and search for that. And also in the RentPrep for Landlords Facebook group, if you search that in the search bar, you'll find the group. Just make sure you answer our screening questions that we have for you, so we accept you in. And you can connect with Andrew, Steve, me, and a bunch of other landlords in there as well. And you also find that file of the 10 questions in there as well.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic Facebook group. It's a really great thing that you guys are offering there. There's a lot of great discussion amongst landlords, not just in the Buffalo region, but all over the country. Everybody has a little bit different experience. Everybody sees the world through their own lens. And when you can communicate with a large group like that and say, this is my situation, what have you guys experienced? You're going to get a lot of varying answers. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. But it's nice to have that ability to bounce questions, comments, concerns off of people. And it really seems to work well in that group. So I would say definitely that's an excellent resource for anybody, a landlord of 1 unit, 100 units, 1,000 units. It's a good resource.
Yeah, good plug.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I agree with you, though. I go through and I just look at some of the questions that have been proposed and then the helpful advice. And I've seen you in there a lot, giving your experience. And, that's something that, where else are you going to get that?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's like on the Facebook Live or before we jumped on the podcast here, we did the lock giveaway, the quick set locks. That was a question. I think somebody said, what kind of locks are you guys using? And it's got to be over 100 comments at this point of people just talking about different locks and how they do it and companies and methods and rotating locks or getting a locksmithing kit and just tons of options out there. But it's something that, again, everybody does it a little bit differently. So that was a really worthwhile discussion to read.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, until next week. And hopefully we'll see some of these listeners kind of joining the group too and joining the discussion. And again, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming in to the office here and being on the podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed this.